Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming today. We are obviously very psyched to have Karensmyers here. Karen, as you all probably know, is an amazing triathlete, one of the first triathletes inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2009. And I'd give you the whole background bio on her that we put out there, but I'd probably mess it up because she has too many accolades to actually list all here. We'd be here probably for half an hour going through all those. So without too much further ado, I just want to thank the Triathlon Club, who I know there's members here who helped promote Karen's appearance today. Obviously, the Nantucket Triathlon brought her to Nantucket. Our funds, as you guys know, go to the Town of Nantucket Scholarship Fund, which we're happy to say we've given over $35,000 to so far this year. So we're glad. It's been great. And we look forward to seeing everybody who's racing, obviously, in July, and we've got other things planned in the future. So please stay involved and as always, spread the word. So, Karen, if it's okay with you, I'm going to put on your video first. I'll just have you slide off to the side. Karen's brought a little video of a little montage of her career, I guess, if you will. It's about 9 minutes, so we're going to watch that first, and then Karen will give us a little presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions. So without further ado, I'll put on the video.
It's too overwhelming at the start of the day to think too much about the entirety of it because it makes you think it's impossible. But if you take it step by step and just, okay, first get through the swim, that's not too bad, or even just get to the turnaround boat. The whole day, you basically take it piece by piece, and that's what finally gets you to the finish line.
Karensmyers is a legend in the world's most grueling sport, the triathlon. In describing her approach to the Ironman, a race designed to break down the toughest athletes, Karen is actually telling the story of her extraordinary life. In 1995, Karen arrived at her third Hawaii Ironman, the toughest of all triathlons, convinced she could win. As the race unfolded, however, Paula Newby-Fraser, a 7-time Ironman champion, had built a seemingly insurmountable lead.
On the bike, when Paula was putting all that time on me, I was like ready to throw my bike into the ocean. But I remember thinking, like, how much things can change within just one little race. And so to never give up.
Opposite in the final leg of the triathlon, the marathon. Her will and desire had pushed her to a point where victory was in her sights.
Paula Newby-Fraser is slowing and now stopping. Staggered like a boxer. A tap from Smyers, who goes on by.
On that day, Karen proved to be the fastest, the strongest, the toughest.
The 34-year-old from Boston had only her third attempt, had never been worse than fourth. Today, her reward is victory. In 11 years of racing, she's never known injury or dropped out.
But in the glory of her triumphant moment, Karen had no way of knowing how quickly she would have to apply the lessons of her triathlon to her own life.
And it just happens in a flash. I remember falling all around me and just thinking, how did I get in this situation? Like, can I just turn back the clock 5 seconds and I won't do this window right now?
I came back and my neighbor said, oh, Karen went to the hospital, and, and fortunately I didn't go through the house because I think it was all covered with blood.
In a freak accident at her home, Karen severed her hamstring trying to change a window, only one day before she had planned to leave for the World Cup in Monte Carlo. Instead, for the first time, Karen would be challenged by fear and uncertainty.
This was in 1997. I've been racing since 1984 with never an injury of any kind, never had fallen off my bike, never been out of a race for any reason.
Forced to the sidelines for 6 months, Karen turned her problem into an opportunity.
it presented a perfect opportunity for maternity leave. You know, it was, my husband and I did a little strategizing, and, well, you know, there's one string for it. Ba-boom, Jenna was born in May.
Even her new status as a mother could not stop Karen's competitive instincts, and she began training relentlessly. Then, just as she was rounding into form, devastation. Biking downhill near her Boston home, Karen's cycle was hit from behind by an 18-wheeler. Suddenly, not only her career, but her life was in jeopardy.
I was feeding Jenna, so I just let the machine pick up, and it was the person who was biking with Karen, and he was on a cell phone and saying, "Mike, pick up the phone, pick up the phone." And by the time I got over there, he hung up, or the signal went. But for the next 15 minutes was one of the longest 15 minutes you know, I had waiting for word to what happened.
Karen was alive. She had 6 broken ribs, a lung contusion, and a 3rd-degree shoulder separation. Then there were the mental scars, haunting memories that made her question her desire to continue as a triathlete.
If I'd be training and hear a truck motor behind me, I mean, I would start to shake, and my stomach would, you know, get like a knot in it, and it would be like I couldn't control my bike because I was shaking. You start to wonder, okay, well, why are the stars aligned like this? You know, basically, I finally decided that you can't protect yourself from everything, and that the joy I get out of the sport, and it was worth the risk.
Battling back from her physical injuries and overcoming mental and emotional setbacks, Karen was climbing back to the top of the triathlon world. But nothing could prepare her for the next nightmare in 1999. It began with a routine doctor's visit.
And he just very flippantly said, well, it probably means you have thyroid cancer. I went right to find Michael, who was at the playground with Jenna, and I'm just like, you're not going to believe this. And so that's when we went right home, and we're just like, okay, thyroid cancer, what even is this, you know? And I think it was somewhat disbelief, you know, like there's got to be a mistake here. And, you know, how can I feel this good and have cancer?
Even the uncertainty of Karen's future could not deter the obsession with returning to the Ironman. Injuries had sidelined her for 2 years, and she was going back, no matter what.
Michael and I talked about it and then decided, you know, the Ironman really does take so much focus. You just can't have a lot of distractions, and decided it would be perfectly fine to put the biopsy off until after your Ironman if you want to just concentrate on that for the time being.
In yet courage, Karen led through most of the 1999 Ironman.
I really did put it in the back of my mind. I finished second. I felt like I'd had a good race. And I remember this little thought just all of a sudden popped up in my mind, like, oh yeah, I have to do this biopsy when I get home. I might have cancer. And it was like all of a sudden this weight came back on my shoulder.
Karen's worst fears were confirmed. The nodules were malignant. She had just completed an Ironman with papillary thyroid cancer. Now Karen faced 6 hours of extensive surgery, followed by a course of radioactive iodine treatment. Now the mental toughness honed in training and competition would be tested against a new challenge, conquering her cancer.
Everything about my career in sports has helped me get through the setbacks for sure, and just having the, you know, the perseverance with it. The fact that it's a challenge and that you really do have to fight, you know, with yourself to get through it is what makes the rewards that much greater.
And fight she did. Despite her valiant efforts, Karen was unable to return to the level necessary to compete in Sydney. Now, after fighting for 16 years to make triathlon an Olympic sport, she could only watch and cheer while others represented the United States of America.
It's the journey that's important, and I know very well that only 3 people out of, you know, 25 very deserving people are going to make this team. As long as I gave it my best shot, I'm going to be at peace. Come on!
I think she's resilient. not only in her accidents, but in her training schedules and everything, you know. Plan A doesn't work, go to Plan B, you know, and sometimes she gets down to Plan Z. Her results speak for themselves.
Today, Karen Smyers is back. She competes against women half her age, but remains one of the world's premier triathletes.
You know, every setback has its little silver linings, it really does, and you learn something every time you have to overcome something. The biggest thing for me is not taking things for granted, you know, that you never know when the things that you know, love and appreciate could get taken away, and so just to, you know, really try and live in the moment.
Athletes of lesser character would have been tempted to pack it in after shredding a hamstring, getting hit by a truck, or fighting cancer. In her life, as in her triathlons, Karen Smyers simply takes it one step at a time.
Sorry about the volume on that. It was kind of, must have been some buffering issues or something.
I
But
apologize for that. Just once you get going, if you have questions and stuff, because we're videotaping this today, just ask you to go to the mics on the side so that the sound is good. So with that, go ahead, Karen.
Great. Well, thanks. Before you guys all decide to run out of the room because you're afraid a tornado may hit the building because I'm in here, I haven't had any really bad accidents in a good decade or so. So you guys are safe, I think, unless I'm due. I'm not sure. So thanks so much for coming. It's a real pleasure for me to be here in Nantucket. I haven't been here in a good, probably, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years, I think. I've been here a couple times for the Iron Relay, which is a lot of fun. And it's just a beautiful island. It's funny, I have a 8-year-old son, and I came over with my whole family. And when I told my son that we were going to Nantucket for a few days, and he's like, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, it's an island. You know, it's going to be really nice. It's a beautiful island." And I said, "But it's not going to be like a hot island," because I didn't want him to think I was going to the Caribbean or something. And he's like, "What are we going to a cold island for?" I thought that was pretty funny. But he has been pleasantly surprised at how nice it is. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my background. I got into triathlon, and when I got out of college, I was just looking for a sport to be a part of. I had always been in sports, and I couldn't imagine my life without one, to be honest. And always had been on a team in my schools that I'd gone to through junior high, high school, and college. And when I graduated, I finally thought, oh my gosh, what will I do with myself? And a college roommate happened to find out about triathlon. She was a runner mostly, and she decided that one summer that we graduated, instead of getting a real job, she was going to train really hard for this triathlon. It's called the Bud Light in Boston. And she thought that if she could be in the top 3, she would earn more money in prize money than she would if she had gotten a summer job. So I thought that was a really interesting theory, and I kind of sat by the sidelines and watched to see how it turned out for her. And she ended up getting second place, and I think she won $500, which back then was as much as she probably would have made in a summer job. So it worked out pretty well for her. So we kind of started training together after that, and I entered my first one back in 1984. And I have to say I was pretty hooked right from the first one, just other than my bike getting stolen the night before, which is a little bit of a bummer, a little setback there. Ended up borrowing a bike so I could do the race, but just had a blast and decided it was definitely the thing I could throw myself into. At the same time, I still thought I would be doing it mostly as a hobby. I had a full-time job in Boston and working at a computer consulting company. But it ended up, after a few years, I discovered that I actually could make prize money also. And I started to get a couple of sponsors, and it eventually turned into a career for me. And I have pretty much been making a career out of the sport ever since. So I'm now, do I dare tell you, I'm 50, I'll turn 51 this year, and I actually still hold my professional license, which is pretty funny. People are, when I run into people I haven't seen in a while at races, they're like, "You're still racing?" And I think it's, if it weren't for the fact that I'm professional, people wouldn't really be questioning it, because one of the beautiful things about our sport is that you can keep racing when you're older. I tell people that one of the reasons I stay in the sport is because I want to be one of those people that gets excited to turn, age 60, because you move into an easier age group, So there's all these people that are like, when they turn older, they're like, yes, I'm going to crush everybody in the 80 to 84 age group, So I want to be excited about getting older. So that's why I think it's a great idea to stay in this sport. I have my eyes set on the 80 to 84 age group record in Hawaii. No woman has finished yet in that category. So probably by the time I get there, they'll be doing it in 10 hours. But for now, it looks like it's kind of an easy mark. So anyway, people ask me, why after all these setbacks and, what was it that's been enabled me to get back into the sport every time, and why I didn't just kind of give it up after being hit by an 18-wheeler. And I have to say, other than the fact that I don't want to get a real job, which is probably my main motivation, I try and make it a little more inspirational than that. So I've boiled it down to what I call the 4 Ps. And these are the qualities that I think are important, not just for me as an athlete, but for me as a person, that have helped me to overcome a lot of the setbacks that I've had, and the things that I think apply to anybody when they're approaching a challenge. The first thing that I think is just absolutely crucial is that I found something I'm passionate about. And for me, it's the sport of triathlon. But I'm sure most of you also have something, hopefully a lot of you are passionate about the sport of triathlon as well, and that's why you're here. But having something that motivates you can help you get through just about anything. So anytime that I considered quitting the sport, for sure the closest I probably came to quitting was after being hit by the truck. And that was mostly because it was a fear that I found really, really hard to get over. I was really afraid of biking anytime I could hear traffic, especially having been hit from behind, because you feel like that's so out of your control. You can't see what's ahead of you to, brake and avoid it. So there's a certain element of trust when you're out biking and you hear someone behind you. You're just hoping that motorist isn't texting. Back then there was no texting, but that they're going to be paying attention and avoid you. So I did some soul searching, and I thought, well, if I can't get over this fear, then basically you have to quit the sport, because you have to bike as triathlon. It's one of the 3 sports. And when I boiled it down to that, I thought, I don't want to quit. I'm not ready for that. I really want to. This has kind of become my lifestyle. And that is what made me get back on my bike and just gradually get over that fear. I'm never completely over it, I have to say, but it got me back out there, and it helped riding with other people, because you can't freak out if you're riding in a group. If you all of a sudden get scared and decide to hit your brakes because you hear a truck behind you, you're going to make the person in back of you crash. So that helped a lot, learning that, if I was in a group, I had a responsibility to kind of ride normally and not start doing crazy things. So eventually I did get over it. Same thing with anytime I had a setback, which required a long period of rehab. When I hurt my hamstring, I think the sound crapped out a little bit on that. I was changing a storm window. It was kind of a homemade storm, I guess, and I don't know if there was a crack in the glass or what, but as I lifted it over my head, the glass just fell all around me, and a big shard just caught me in the back of the hamstring. It was a very bizarre accident, and I have to say, since then, I've just, to keep myself safe, I've eliminated all housework from my repertoire. But that, it was just bizarre, and I found myself, and I was actually in the best shape of my life at that point. It was I had just finished my last long training for an Ironman. I was supposed to be flying over to Europe and had a big World Cup there that I was going to be doing, and all of a sudden it was boom, just, cast on my leg up to my hip, and they told me 4 to 6 month rehab. So, the thought then was, geez, that's a long time off. Am I ever going to get back to the shape I was in? And just, knowing that, gosh, I've got so many years ahead of me in this sport. What's 6 to 9 months? And I wanted to take time off to have start a family anyway. So we just kind of decided to regroup, make the best of the situation, and I knew I would get back to it eventually because I loved it. So that kind of brings me to the second P, which is perseverance. So I learned over the years that as long as you stick with something, you're going to get better at it. It's all about just hanging in there despite setbacks, and I don't view them as failures usually when you don't achieve a goal or you aren't able to do something as well as you planned. I don't think of it as failure. I think of it as just temporarily not succeeding. So I learned that from a really young age when I remember my swimming. I was taking swimming lessons when I was probably maybe a little younger than you, probably around 6 or 7 years old. I had already passed the lily pads. That's, where you learn to float. And then I think you move along to tadpoles where you can actually move through the water. And I think I was up to frogs, which is where you have to learn to do the breaststroke kick. And the breaststroke kick, back then, I don't know if they still teach it like this, but we used to always learn all these things with scissors kicks to begin with, the side stroke, and they may not even teach that anymore in swimming, I don't know. But then to switch from this scissors kick, where your legs are asymmetrical, to learning to do a symmetrical frog kick was really too much for my brain, I guess, at the time. And I just couldn't break myself of the habit, and they would not pass me until I could do that frog kick. And I remember coming home from swimming lessons and telling my mom I failed swimming lessons, and she's like, Karen, you didn't fail, you just didn't pass this time. The next session starts on Monday. You'll take it again, and I'm sure you'll pass next time. And it was just a great attitude that she had, which was, it's not failure. It's just temporarily not succeeding. And as long as you keep trying, you're going to get it. And I think I failed again, or didn't succeed again. But finally, the third time was a charm, and I passed that frogs. And lo and behold, I went on to become a breaststroker in college. That was my main stroke. So if you hang in there, you can eventually figure it out. Same thing with my foray into running was in college. I had always been in other sports. I did, I think, tennis in the spring when I was in high school, and definitely not good enough to be on the college tennis team. But I found myself, I focused mostly on swimming. And when swimming ended in March or so, I found myself with a few months with no sport. And I thought, I can't do it. So my college roommate kind of said, hey, you ought to go talk to the track coach, see about joining the track team. I'm like, that's great. Yeah, sure, I'll do that. So I went down and talked to the track coach, and we had been doing some running for swim practice. It was in the fall. We would do a little bit of preseason training. And I was one of the better runners of the swimmers, and I was quite proud of myself for that, but turns out that's not necessarily the people to be comparing yourself to when you're trying to be a runner. So I talked to the track coach, and I'm like, yeah, I'd like to, maybe run the half mile or the mile. And he's like, okay, well, how much are you running? And I'm like, I can run 3 miles. And I remember adding without stopping, because most of the swimmers couldn't do it without stopping. So I was quite proud of the fact that I'd run 3 miles without stopping. And he kind of suppressed a giggle, and he's like, okay, great. Well, why don't you build up to 60 minutes of running? When you can run for an hour, then you can start coming to practice. And, I'm sure in his mind, he's like, yeah, we got to get this nice base for this, girl before, so she doesn't get hurt on the track. And I was like, an hour? Oh my God. So I went back, and next run tried to add on 5 or 10 minutes. And then, a week later tried to add on another 10 or 15 minutes. And everything from below my neck down started to hurt. I just, I was used to being supported in the water and not having to deal with gravity. All of a sudden, my ankles, my knees, my hips, everything just started to rebel. And I kind of limped back to him finally, and I'm like, it's just so hard for me to do that long of a run. All I want to do is a half mile. Why do I have to run for an hour? And he's like, well, let's see. You're a swimmer, so you have good aerobic capacity maybe? All right, well, jump in these hill repeats with the girls today, and we'll see how you do. And these are just little short kind of 30-second sprints uphill, and right away he could see that I had this great aerobic engine from swimming twice a day for several years. So he's like, it kind of opened up his eyes, and he learned that, you know what, it's going to take her a while to build up to being able to run an hour. Well, let's not make her do that right off the bat. So the two of us kind of figured it out together, and eventually I did get it to being able to run an hour without stopping. But it did not come easily, and so keep that in mind. You don't come out of the womb able to run a marathon. People often say to me, like, oh, I could never run a marathon. I'm like, well, if you can, run a half a mile, you can eventually build up to a marathon. We all can. It's just a question of persevering. So keep that in mind. The other huge P for me is a positive attitude. And I think, it sounds a little bit cliche, but there's all kinds of ways you can deal with what gets thrown at you, and you have control over how you allow things that happen to you, how you are going to approach them. And I think if you always just try to make the best of the situation, you're going to be far better off than if you're always looking back with regret about something that bad that happened. And there's little tricks that I've learned. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time that I'm in a sunny mood, but I definitely learned to focus on the things you can control. One of my favorite stories about how your attitude really can make a huge, huge impact on your performance happened to me in my first World Championships, actually second World Championships, but I'll tell you a quick story about my first one first. Back in 1989, it was the first year ever that they were holding an official World Championships in triathlon, and I had just turned full-time professional. The job that I had worked for decided to go bankrupt. Partly because I was probably taking 2-hour lunches to get my swim training in, but maybe not. In any case, I found myself finally with a little extra time to train. I had always, the biking had definitely been my weakness when I took up triathlon, because it was the one thing I didn't have a background in. And so it was taking me a while to pick up that biking. It was also the hardest thing to fit in with a full-time job, because biking takes a little longer. So I couldn't fit it in easily at lunch hour, unless I make my company go bankrupt. I couldn't, it was hard to fit it in before work, and after work it would be dark, So it was the thing that was definitely, I'd do it on the weekends, and I'd bike to and from work, but apparently that wasn't quite good enough training to really become a good cyclist. When the company went bankrupt, I finally had that time to fit in and work on my weakness. And they announced how the qualifying would go for this World Championships. It was, you had to be in the top 2 at 3 different races. It would be a 6-person team that would get sent to Avignon, France. So I made it my goal for that year to try and make this national team to go to the World Championships. So the first race that I went to, I had so much pressure on myself. I was so nervous, and I ended up just having a terrible race. I finished back in, maybe 9th or 10th, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm nowhere near top 2. How the heck am I going to do this? And I said, well, move on to the next race. Maybe I'll do better there. Went to the next race, same thing. I just felt like I had the worst race ever. I was so tight and nervous and putting pressure on myself that I just felt like I never really raced well. Finished maybe 7th or 8th. So it finally came down to this. And there were people beating me that I knew I could beat too, so I was just mad at myself for not having my best day. It finally came down to the 3rd race, my last chance to make this team. And we got out this race. I usually would come out of the water near the front from my swim background. So the same thing happened in this race. And then usually what would happen is one by one, I'd watch people go by me on the bike, and I'd get madder and madder at myself as I fell further back in the field. And yeah, lo and behold, that's what started to happen again. As the one girl went by me, and I'm like, oh, darn. The second girl went by me. Oh, darn. Now I've got to pass 2 of them on the run. Another 3 people go by me. I started losing count, and I started to get really, really down on myself. And I remember there being a moment out on that bike where I finally was just so frustrated and upset that I just decided, that's it. You were not meant to be a triathlete. You can just quit the sport after this race, because you're going to finish this race the best of your ability, because quit in the middle of something. I'd made that vow to myself. So finish this race the best you can, and then just drop the biking. You're never going to be good at it. And you can just be a runner or something. So I remember very clearly making that decision. And somehow or other, that decision lightened me up. All of a sudden, I was like, people weren't pulling away quite as much on the bike. I finally got off the bike. I'm like, oh, thank God I can run. Get rid of this bicycle. And I thought, oh, good, those girls aren't as far ahead as I thought. And I ran up and caught a few girls. And usually I would spend my run catching up to people. I saw another girl that wasn't too far ahead, and I managed to catch her. And after a little while, I realized that up ahead there was a girl with a motorcycle next to her. And I'm like, I wonder what that motorcycle's doing in the middle of the road. And it's kind of blocking my path. I'm going to run up and yell at it, So I get closer and I realize, oh, that's Jan Reppold running next to that's like the first girl that passed me on the bike. I think she's leading the race. That's the lead motorcycle. Oh my God. And I managed to catch her and pass her, and I ended up winning the race, qualifying for the World Championships. And I look back on that, that decision that I made halfway, and I think what happened was that I was putting so much pressure on myself, thinking about the outcome, about what result I wanted, that I wasn't thinking about just doing and being and executing the best race that I could. So what I've learned is to kind of, it's okay to have goals, but you also want to kind of just lighten up a little bit on yourself and focus on the present and doing the best you can at any given moment. Because the minute I started to get down on myself because I wasn't, about to be in the top two still, it was a downward spiral, and I was making myself basically forcing myself to not do as well as I could. So, it's good to have goals, but don't forget to enjoy the moment, do what you're good at, and focus on that, and not get too wrapped up in not achieving, the end result right away. So I qualified for that World Championships. I went on. It was in Avignon, France. It was a fantastic experience for me. Actually, my biking finally started to come around. Maybe that was a confidence boost that I needed. I ended up finishing 4th at that World Championship, which for me was a huge, jump up in performance. And I was all excited. I remember going to the award ceremony. Usually, I think the top 10 got prize money, and usually they'll call everybody that got prize money up to the stage and, present you with a check or whatever. So I was sitting in the audience waiting to get called up on stage, and lo and behold, it ends up being like the Olympics, where they only call the top 3 up, the silver, the bronze, silver, and gold. So I was sitting there in the audience getting a little bit more depressed every second that they didn't bring me up. And I realized, geez, 4th is as good as 100th. Next year, I've got to be top 3. So that set my kind of goal for the next year. And, I still believe me was thrilled with 4th, but it gave me something really fun to shoot for the next year. The next year, I had a great season, qualified pretty easily. The race was in Orlando, Florida in August. Okay, now I don't know about you kids if you know anything about temperature and Florida temperatures, but August in Florida is pretty darn hot. And I was coming from the Boston area, so we had our share of hot weather, but we were also starting at about noon. Okay, so the pros were starting late so that they get a lot of people out there cheering for them. So I got to this World Championship, all excited about trying to improve on my performance, and I had a great swim again, came out near the lead, got out on the bike, and one girl who was kind of the favorite, her name was Erin Baker, she kind of got out in front on the bike and started to pull away. Now, we all knew she was a little bit vulnerable maybe, because she had just done an Ironman something like 2 weeks before. So we thought, she's great and everything, but can she pull that off doing another race just 2 weeks later after having done a full Ironman? So we were hoping she might be tired on the run, but she wasn't showing it on the bike. So a few of the rest of us were in a kind of a loosely maybe a minute to a minute and a half behind her. And we got off the bike, and I would manage to have a great transition. I ran out onto the run course in 2nd place. I was so psyched. I'm like, yes, and running's my strength, and I'm in the top 3 just like I wanted. And so I started running along and all proud of myself. And it was on a golf course with not a lot of shade. And about a mile in, all of a sudden, 2 girls went by me at once, running together. This girl, Joy Hansen, and Carol Montgomery. And I was sort of, I don't get passed on the run all that often. I was like, wow. And I tried to keep up to them for a little while, and there are these little kind of skinny runner types, and they started pulling away from me, and I started feeling kind of heavy and slow and hot, and it's like, geez, no wonder they're running so fast. Look at them. They probably weigh about 15 pounds less than me. It's not fair. I got these big swimming shoulders to lug around. And I started, coming up with all these excuses. And then I started just thinking about, why are they having a race in Florida in August and starting it at noon? And why are we on a golf course with no shade? Where are the trees? Geez. And I just started to get into the worst frame of mind possible, just negative, negative, negative. I'm so hot. I'm from Boston. They shouldn't expect me to deal with this. And every thought in my head was about why I should be doing terrible. And, of course, I'm thinking I'm in fourth. Darn, that's not top three. I'm not going to get called up on stage. And so here I'm running along. Those girls pulled away. I could still see them. They were maybe 15 to 20 seconds ahead of me, and I was still in fourth. And I remember running by Scott Molina, who's a name some of you guys may recognize from the old days, but he was married to Erin Baker, the girl that was in front. And he's an American. She's from New Zealand. And he cheered for me as an American, and he's like, come on, Karen, you're doing great. And I must have given him a look like, do you know how hot it is out here, Scott? And he was kind of taken aback. And he's like, what is wrong with her? She's in fourth place. Second and third are just right there. And he's like, Karen, you got to want it. And it was just a little comment that it was the right thing at the right place. It just kind of snapped me out of my self-pity a little bit. And I just kind of realized, oh my gosh, I've been training for this one race for a year with this one goal in mind, and there is second and third right in front of me. I can see it. And all I can think about is I'm hot, I'm going to be done with this race in 10 minutes. I can put cold water on my head, Just stop complaining and do your best. And it just kind of got me out of that mindset, and I started to reel those girls back in. And as I did so, it turns out that Erin was finally starting to crack a little bit from having done that Ironman. And so I ended up going by her without even really realizing it, because I was still looking at those two girls ahead of me. They had passed her, and then I found myself going by Erin. So I moved into third without even really realizing it. With about a half mile to go, there was a little uphill, and I managed to close the gap on the two of them. And I just thought, now or never, and I just started running by them. And I remember Carol turning to Joy and saying, Karen's back. It was like I was resurrected from the dead. And it's funny because you don't usually have a whole lot of changing in position during one discipline. You might have people that get ahead on the bike, and then you have the runners that come through. So it was a little bit of something unusual, and I do feel like I was resurrected from the dead, and it was all up here. It had nothing to do with my training or my physical, capacity at that point. It was all my mental attitude, and I surprised them, and I just zipped by, and I sprinted down, and I high-fived Mickey Mouse at the finish line because it was in Orlando, and I won my first world championship. And I really, really think that the difference between, having the race of my life and having a race that I would have been disappointed in all came with one little change in attitude. So never underestimate how much your mind can help you achieve something. And that is something you all have control over. So always try and harness, and you keep in mind, you can harness it for the bad, you can harness it for the good. For sure that you can get in that downward spiral where it makes you do worse than you should, and you can harness it for the good where it makes you achieve things you never thought possible. So the third, let's see, are we on third or fourth? Fourth P, perspective. Now that's something that has developed over time, I think, but certainly getting something like cancer is a nice jolt into perspective. I definitely did sort of take my physical health for granted. Very, very scary to be diagnosed with something that I couldn't feel growing inside me at all. Thyroid cancer is, some people will have like a disorder of the thyroid where they'll feel very tired or their thyroid's not functioning right. Mine was functioning totally fine. It was just luck that I found it to begin with. It just felt swollen to me. And the doctor was smart enough to recognize that I should get an ultrasound. But it really did just come out of the blue, and I thought, how could I have cancer? I'm doing Ironman racing. I feel great. This is impossible. So it made me realize, that you really do have to, nobody's immune from some diseases. You really have to take care of yourself, get your preventative checkups, and eat well, get your sleep, get your exercise. Who knows whether, they don't know exactly the cause for many of these things, but the more you take care of yourself, the more you're going to reduce your chances of getting things. So definitely don't take my health for granted. Just because I'm out there swinging, biking, and running doesn't mean I'm in perfect health, that's for sure. And to just, seize the day. There's been so many times now where I haven't been able to compete, like at the Ironman, for various accidents and illnesses and maternity leaves and things like that, that I appreciate every time I'm able to be in shape to do something like an Ironman. I think, wow, let's savor this one. Who knows how many more you have in you. So for sure, appreciating what you have while you have it is important. Well, and now I find myself at 50 years old, and I know that I'm not racing quite as quickly as I was back in my 30s, but I'm also aware that, even though I might feel a little slow now compared to my old days, when I'm 60, I'm going to be like, oh, I'd love to feel like I did when I was 50. So I'm trying to appreciate that right now. The other piece of the perspective pie that I am very, very thankful for was when I was trying to make the Olympic team in the year, this was back in 2000, it was the first one ever for triathlon, and it really was a good decade. I mean, we, back in 1992, were hoping that our sport would get into the Olympics, and 92 didn't quite happen, but we were really hopeful for it to happen in 96 because it was in Atlanta, and so the sport had been born in the U.S., so we were really, really thinking it would get in 96, and I was in the midst of a 8-time national championship winner, so I was kind of a favorite to make the team back then. But by the time it finally did make it in 2000, it was coming right after the truck accident, the hamstring injury, maternity leave, thyroid cancer, and there was one other accident they didn't quite mention in the film. They ran out of space. But right after the Ironman, where I finished second, 99. That was when I had to go get the biopsy done to determine for sure that I had the thyroid cancer. And I was trying to get my ranking back so that I could qualify for the Olympic trials, because I'd been out of racing for 2 years for the other thing. So you had to do a certain amount of races to get your ranking boosted up to get into the trials. So I decided to squeeze one more race in after the Ironman and before I got the biopsy. And it was in Mexico. And it was a ITU race where it's draft legal on the bike, so you get to ride in a pack. And so I went to this race, and during the bike portion, a girl in front of me, her pedal fell out of her crank, which is a very, very odd accident, just kind of out of the blue. And so she crashed right in front of me. I crashed over top of her, and I broke my collarbone. But this was on the other side from the separated shoulder, so I figured it might even out my stroke a little bit, I was hoping. But in any case, I had to fly home with a broken collarbone and get my biopsy done the next day, and which did show that I was positive for thyroid cancer. So went under the surgery for the thyroid cancer with the broken collarbone, which was actually not bad because I could combine rehab. So I figured, all right, let the collarbone heal while I'm letting my thyroid incision heal. And then I had about 3 or 4 months to get ready for the Olympic trials, and that was with not swimming for a good 6 to 8 weeks. And when I went back, I was a very good patient, let my collarbone heal without moving my shoulder, which turned out to be not the best thing in the world, because when I went to start swimming again, my shoulder basically, I had about this much movement, and I'm supposed to get and start swimming again. So I had a frozen shoulder. So I had, a month or 2 of rehab trying to get that shoulder motion back. And so the Olympic trials are getting closer and closer. But I'll tell you, having an Olympics to train for, or a possible Olympics, it was the absolute best thing in the world for me, because I did not think twice about, oh, I have cancer, poor me. I didn't think, oh gosh, why did I have to break my collarbone? All I thought was, oh my gosh, get in the water, swim, move your, get going. So it was just a wonderful, wonderful motivator for me at a time that could have been really, really hard mentally to get through. And I did not end up making that team, but I just look back and think, I am so glad I had something that was so motivating and all-encompassing that that's all I had to do was devote myself to that. And so that's my my nice little perspective. It's not sometimes all about the goal itself. It's a lot about the journey to get there, and just having something that makes you want to get out of bed out of the morning, that makes you want to look ahead and not look back and be full of regret. So always set goals for yourself and find something that excites you, and then stick with it at all costs, and smile a lot, and that will get you to your goals. I'd love to open up to lots of questions, because I feel like you guys probably will have some questions to ask after all this. First of all, how many of you are doing the Nantucket Triathlon? Excellent. Wonderful. Have anybody a first-time triathlete that's never done one before? Good, good, good. What's the scariest part for you? The swim, open water swim? Just a couple little quick tips. I have to tell you a funny story about my husband's first triathlon. So he was not a swimmer, and that was definitely the scariest part for him. And he had worked, hard on trying to do the crawl stroke and being able to do the breathing. And I have to say, he didn't quite have it down by the time he was doing this triathlon, but he knew he could do the backstroke till the cows came home, So his plan was to start out doing the breathing until he basically hyperventilated, which would be in about 20 strokes, and then he would flip on his back, and your head's out of the water, so you can basically keep going as long as you're making progress, right? So that's exactly what happened. He started out in the swim, and after a little while, he was maybe halfway to that buoy, and he's like, okay, flip to the back, okay, go, go, go. So he backstroked for what he thought would be long enough to get him to that buoy, and he finally kind of sat up to look to see how he was doing, and discovered he had done a U-turn and gone all the way back to the start and was in water up to his knees, and everybody's looking at him like, oh, did you decide to quit? And he's like, he just got out of the water. He was so embarrassed that he didn't continue. So that was his first triathlon. So he went back and he practiced some more real hard, got that swimming down, and managed to, keep up the breathing this time so he could keep looking ahead to see where he was going. So in his second triathlon, he managed to swim the whole thing, but it completely exhausted him, and he was, but he made it through, and he was standing around talking to a friend of his after the race, and he's like, geez, the swimming just killed me though, if I could just stop and rest once in a while, it would make such a difference, and his friend is like, oh, yeah, every time I got tired, I just stood up. Did you know the water was only up to your waist the whole way? My husband's like, what? So anyway, check the water depth. It could be that you could wade your way through the swim anyway. But it definitely is the hardest part for most people. But just keep in mind, once you know that you don't have to do the crawl stroke the whole way. There's plenty of, you have a safety stroke that you're good at, breaststroking, treading water's fine, floating on your back, elementary backstroke, any stroke is legal, and anytime you do start to lose your breath, just go back to your safety stroke, because you can always just get your breathing back if you have a nice calm. The thing about the crawl stroke is it's this pattern of breathing that sometimes can make it hard to catch your breath if you get into a hyperventilating state, because you're forced into this pattern. But if you just take your head out of the water for a second, do breaststroke with your head out, you can then breathe at your own rate, calm yourself down, and start up again when you're ready. It's also perfectly legal to hold on to a surfboarder or a kayaker, as long as you don't ask them to tow you through the swim. You can hold on to things just to get your breath. So sometimes just knowing you have an out is enough to kind of calm you down. And you can take as long as you want. I don't think there's there might be a time limit. I don't know. Is there a time limit? No. So, take your time, and that's enough to just, sometimes calm you down and get you through it. It's the same as swimming in a pool. It's just that you don't have those walls around you and you can't see the bottom. But it really doesn't matter how deep the water is, because you're not swimming on the bottom, you're swimming on the top. So that's another thing. People get kind of freaked out about the deepness of it, but you should be floating on top. So don't worry about the depth. Let's see. So anybody have some questions they want to ask?
I'm just going to start off with a couple, Karen, just because I got you here, so I'm going to take advantage. I know that when I talk to people about triathlon and what gets people into triathlon. A lot of times it's some of the races that they've seen on TV. And in particular, I wanted to ask you about 95 when you won in and you beat Paula Newby-Fraser. And if you could just tell us a little bit about that race and how it felt and how you caught her at the end. And of course, she had trouble at the end. And then based on what you saw there, have you had a race like that where you've hit the wall that hard and struggled and tried to get yourself across the finish line? Because I think that some of what you described about the mental toughness that you have as an athlete is really what motivates a lot of people to do it too. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So yeah, that race, it's pretty burned in my memory because it was a pretty big day for me. Going into that race, it's it was a lot of self-imposed pressure. I guess I hadn't learned my lesson from back in 1989, but in 95, Paula Newby-Fraser, who had won the race, I think at the time it was 7 times, and she had announced that she was going to retire after that race. Now, I had finished, I'd only been doing it was only going to be my 3rd Ironman ever, and I'd finished 4th the first year that I had done it, and 2nd the year before that, and both times Paula had won. And both times she had pretty much crushed me on the bike. And I knew that I could swim with her, and I thought I could outrun her. And to be honest, in short races, I could keep up with her or beat her on the bike. So I thought, she just knows how to pace it better than me. It's not that she's better than me. I got to figure this out. So I thought just her experience was paying off for her, and that, she was beatable, even though, I knew she was amazing. But I thought, this is my last chance to beat her. And if I don't, from then on, whoever wins will always be, well, they weren't as good as Paula, obviously, because she was never beaten. So I kind of had this little pressure on myself that I wanted to at least, my last try there, I wanted to try and give her at least a race. The other factor in my wanting to do well against her was that because she'd won so many times, the NBC, it's the only time triathlon really gets, big TV coverage. It's covered on NBC, and they make it into a big hour-and-a-half or 2-hour show. And because Paula had won so many times, they'd featured her over and over and over, and they were a little tired of it. They couldn't just keep doing that over and over. So they gradually started showing a lot more of the men's race, and the women were kind of getting shafted. So in my mind, I had all of womankind on my shoulders to at least make it into an interesting enough race that they would show it on TV. So that was my thinking going into this race. And so I shadowed her in the swim, or we came out basically side by side. And on the bike, the first 25 miles, I thought, just stay with her. Don't, do anything crazy. And I remember feeling so easy. I could see her. She was right ahead of me. I'm like, gosh, I would be going so much harder right now if I, but I'm going to be smart and just stay calm. And all of a sudden at 25 miles, we hit a headwind. And if that's one of the most challenging things about Hawaii, people think it's the heat, which definitely is hard. But on the bike, the winds are atrocious. And there's times where I'm just hanging on for dear life onto my bars so that I don't get blown off the bike. To be honest, one year I was training in Hawaii, and I was with another girl, and the winds were so scary out on the Queen K that we actually had to stop biking and flag down a truck to give us a ride home. We were afraid for our lives. So there's some races where it's worse than others. This case, it wasn't a crosswind, it was a headwind. And all of a sudden, it just felt like I was a Mack truck going through, this big, huge wind. And she looked like a little needle just threading her way through. And she just started to disappear in the distance. And I was so frustrated. I'm like, come on, keep up with her. I was, just killing myself. And all of a sudden, I just went from easy to I can't go any harder, and she's biking away from me. And so I started to get splits. The person in the back, always it's easy for someone to give a split to tell you how far behind. So people thought they were doing me a favor. They'd be like, Karen, she's only 30 seconds ahead. And I'm like, I know, I can see her. And then the next person, I'd be like, Karen, she's a minute and a half ahead. I'm like, yeah, did you know I was with her only 5 miles ago? And every split I got, it was like, someone putting the knife in and giving a little twist, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes. And every time I would make a deal with myself, like, all right, you can catch up to her 2 minutes on the run. So as long as you keep it to 2 minutes, you're okay. And then I'd get a split that it was 3. And I'd be like, okay, no more than 3. That's it. So gradually, I just was constantly making, breaking my promises about how much I was going to let her get ahead. So, like I said, I didn't really learn my lesson about the positive attitude, I guess. So I remember at mile like 8 or so, I mean, not 8, when I was about 8 minutes behind her, we were coming back we'd made the turnaround and gone up this place called Kauai High, and you got about 40 miles to go at this point. And Dave Scott was there cheering. Dave Scott is he won the men's race 6 times and was kind of a legend. And he's also a coach and very, very bright guy. And so when I biked by him, I remember thinking, I don't want him to think I'm taking this laying down, So I remember him saying, Karen, you're 8 minutes back. And I remember just standing up on my pedals and sort of sprinting for like 5 pedal strokes to say, Dave, I'm trying my best. I'm really not happy about this. And I remember him just kind of going, Karen, you're doing fine. You got to do your own race. And it was, again, you have 40 miles more to think about that comment. So what do you think about? I think about what Dave Scott told me. So I let that comment kind of sink in. I'm like, he's right. I have absolutely no control over how Paula Newby-Fraser is biking right now. Like, she may be biking so hard that she's not going to be able to run. Then she may be setting the women's record by 20 minutes, and I'm just not up to that today. So I have to start taking care of myself. I was still in second place, even though I felt like I was, getting last because of how far behind I was. So I, again, just sort of did this little step back, focus on myself, finish the bike the best you can, and then just have the run of your life, because I knew I was in very good run shape. And so I just said, get through the rest of this bike the best you can. Stop beating yourself up. And lo and behold, I got off the bike. I felt fantastic on the run. I was 12 minutes back. And I remember thinking, well, if I catch up 30 seconds a mile, I'll catch her at mile 24. You guys do that math? So I knew I'd caught up 4 minutes in the first 8 miles the year before. And so I said, that's what I got to do again this time. So boom, 8 mile mark. They said I was only 8 minutes back. I'm like, excellent, I'm on track. And, I didn't know if I'd actually catch her, but having a goal, a little motivation for every mile that I was, trying to make up time was very motivating to me. So the next 8 miles, I was still getting splits. Sometimes you can't rely on the splits. They'd go anywhere from you're 6 miles back to saying she's right ahead of you. But once in a while, I'd get a split that seemed to make sense. But I started figuring out that I was not quite catching up as much in those middle 8 miles. And I think I made up 2.5 minutes instead of 4. And so at the 16-mile mark, I was still, 6 minutes back or something like that. Meanwhile, she had been getting, word that I was closing the gap. And she had, according to her, I've heard later, that she was in her own little weird self, racing against herself in some ways. And she had made a decision to kind of stop. She usually would stop at the aid stations and really get in a good drink and walk through them. And I guess in her past, a long time ago, she had been passed one time walking through an aid station. So she made a decision, I'm not walking through any aid stations. I don't want that to be, the reason that she catches me. So, but it kind of stopped her normal routine a little bit, and she ended up not getting in quite enough calories. I think right from the beginning, she had been sort of lax on taking her calories in. And as you see, calories are absolutely crucial in an Ironman. So she was kind of fighting her own little demons, and I finally got another split where I was, I think, 3.5 minutes back with 10K to go, and I'm like, still pretty long way to go on someone like Paula Newby-Fraser, but maybe I can get close. So I kept working. Finally, someone told me I was 1.5 minutes back with 1.5 miles to go. And they're like, you can get her. And I'm like, yeah, if I run a 6-minute mile. Like, I thought once she could hear the finish line, there's just no way. But this whole time, it was only splits in the head. I was not able to see her. And finally, there was that, they show on the TV where she had gone around, they show me coming around a corner. Well, I had finally caught sight of her just as she had gone around that corner for the first time, since she had left me at 25 miles into the bike. And people asked what was my favorite part. That was the absolute best moment of the race for me, because I remember the hair on my arms just standing up straight, because I thought it was the coolest race in the whole wide world, that I was actually going to be on the home stretch with Paula Newby-Fraser. And to be honest, I really didn't know if I could catch her at that point, because she was so close to the finish. And so I probably had 20, 30 seconds, but we were a half mile from the finish, And I thought, that's a lot to make up on someone that can see the finish line. But I just thought, just to make it a cool race, I love it, and just relishing the idea of it. And so when I came around that corner, I was, looking for her, like, where is she? And it's funny, I thought I was sprinting, and I look at the coverage on TV, I'm like, hurry up already. It looks like I'm basically jogging, but it was all I had. And when she kind of did that little stumble where she stopped, I'd only seen her for a sec. I had no idea what trouble she was in. And I thought she'd cramped or something, and I kind of, tapped her on the back because I almost ran into her, to be honest. And I remember, running to the finish line thinking, gosh, if she cramped, she may, get better and be able to still come back on me. So I looked back 3 or 4 times, and I couldn't see her, so I didn't really know what had happened. But they were still announcing, here comes Paula Newby-Fraser for her 8th win. I was like, it's Karen? So they were very confused at the finish line because it had happened so fast, but they finally figured it out. But I remember waiting at the finish line for her to come, and I'm like, she's right there. She should be here any second. And everyone's like, where is she? What happened? And then finally they announced something that Paula Newby-Fraser's collapsed. And I remember her boyfriend at the time, Paul Huddle, was at the finish line, and him just, getting this wide eye and just sprinting down to where she was a quarter mile away. And they show on TV, on the whole show, that he's like, call 911, call 911. I mean, his reaction was, this isn't an Ironman champion on the ground. This is my, girlfriend and, loved one that's in trouble. Because everybody else was kind of crowded around like, oh, we can't help her because, then she'll be disqualified. But she did keep telling people, don't touch me, I might still finish. She stayed on the ground for 20 minutes, and she got cold water, and finally, I don't know if she got any food in her or not, but she finally was able to stand up and walk to the finish line. And she still finished 4th place. Only one other girl passed while she was sitting there. And just as she was about to cross the finish line, one other girl sprinted by to get 3rd. So she still got 4th. And it was the most inspiring thing I've ever seen, was her getting up and finishing that race. She had her bare feet holding her shoes, but she finished that race. And not only that, but she refused to retire because she didn't want to go out that way. And she came back and she won the next year and crushed me. So she definitely corrected her mistakes on the nutrition front, and finished and won her 8th one. I got 3rd that next year. And you asked if I ever had trouble. My biggest problem in those long races is my stomach. I tend to have a little weak link there. I like to race and I like to eat. I don't like to combine the two. And so the hardest part for me is being able to fuel myself and keep up the intensity that I can. If I'm going really easy, I can eat, but the minute I start to really try and race, I have a hard time getting my stomach to digest. So I always tell people the Ironman, it's 50% of it is getting your nutrition right, and 50% of it is having the right mental, toughness. So basically, there's no physical component if you do the math. You just have to eat a lot and be happy, and you're all set. But yeah, the nutrition part is very, very hard, and one of the trickiest parts about it is that often when you don't have enough calories, it affects your brain, right? So your brain needs sugar or calories to function. And so a lot of times out on the race, you get very, very, if you start to run out of calories, you get very, very apathetic, which, if you guys don't know what that means, it means that you don't care. And so it often makes you not take corrective action because you're like, I don't even care if I finish this stupid race. What am I here for? I don't even want to do this anymore. And there's all these people that have trained for years for this big event, and then they find themselves about to quit, and it's all because they're just lacking calories. So I tell the people I coach, don't give in to a bonk. If you ever find yourself, deciding that you just don't care and you want to quit, eat something first and then think about that decision again in 15 minutes, because a lot of times all of a sudden you'll be like, what am I talking about? This is the biggest moment of my life. Keep going. So you really can change your attitude if you make sure you have keep